In this video, we are going to have a look at this ultra-fast Metacon Zhongyi 50mm f0.95 lens for Leica M cameras. Kia ora, good morning everyone, Rich Wang here. Welcome back to the channel. If you are someone who loves ultra-fast prime lenses, you probably would be quite familiar with Zhongyi because they have made a number of different f0.95 lenses for different cameras. I have reviewed their Speedmaster 50mm f0.95 lens for Sony E and also Nikon Z, and also a couple of other f0.95 lenses for the Micro Four Thirds cameras. So today we have a new Zhongyi 50mm f0.95 lens for Leica M camera. Now, this is not the same lens design as the previous 50 f0.95 lens for the Sony E or the Nikon Z or even the Canon one that recently released. This is a completely new and different optics design. So in this video, we are going to have a look at the performance of this lens when I paired it with Leica M10P. And also the Leica M lens, because of the short flange distance, make it pretty much you can mount it, adapt it on any other mirrorless camera in the market. So in this video, we are also going to see how does it performs when I mount it on a Nikon Z camera using the Megadepth autofocus adapter. If you have never heard of the Megadepth adapter before, basically that is an adapter which allows you to use the Leica M mount lenses on a Nikon Z body but with autofocus support. So I have done a review of the adapter a little while ago. I put a link below so you can check out that review if you are interested in that adapter. But anyway, on the second half of this review, I'm also going to share with you my experience using this lens on a Nikon Z body using the Megadepth adapter and see how does it perform in real life, because I have used that combo to shoot an event recently. Before we start the review, I want to quickly mention the price of this lens. The price of this lens is $799 US, so not exactly a very cheap lens. But if you compare to some other 50mm f0.95 lens in the market, compared to the Nikon 58mm not f0.95 lens, this is about 1/10 the price of the Nikon lens. Or if you compare it with the Leica 50mm Nautilus, then this is like 15 times cheaper than the Leica lens. The closest competitor would be the TT Artisan 50mm f0.95 lens, which is around $750. So that is slightly cheaper than this Zhongyi lens, but this Zhongyi 50mm f0.95 lens does have something that the TT Artisan lens doesn't have, which I'm going to talk about in the next session. This Zhongyi 50mm f0.95 lens is completely made of metal. The lens feels pretty heavy because the weight is just under 700 grams, so the weight is pretty much identical to the Leica 50mm Nautilus. Because it is a pretty large lens, so if you're shooting with Leica M camera and look through the rangefinder, you'll find that almost 1/4 of the view from the rangefinder will be blocked by this lens itself. The minimum focus distance of this lens is 1 meter, and the focus flow from the minimum focus distance to infinity is just under 180 degrees. The lens has rangefinder covering, and the focus ring itself feels very smooth, buttery smooth. The lens has a decreased aperture range, and you can choose the aperture value from the maximum aperture f0.95 all the way to f16. The lens also has an integrated lens hood, and I found that if you want to pull it out or push it back, you have to rotate it a little bit, then you can pull it out or push it back easily. Because of the size and the weight of this lens, when mounted on the Leica M camera, like this Leica M10P, it definitely feels a bit front heavy. Zhongyi has implemented the 6-bit coding for this lens. That means when you mount this Zhongyi 50mm f0.95 lens on a late model Leica M camera, the camera would automatically know what is the focal length and the maximum aperture of the lens that you are using. And that also means when you take a photo, the EXIF data would have recorded the correct lens information automatically. So this is something the TT Artisan 50mm f0.95 lens doesn't have. because of the rangefinder coupling, if you are shooting with live view, and when you turn the focus ring, the magnified view will automatically pop up on your LCD screen. Okay, now let's have a look at the image sharpness, and let's first look at the center image sharpness. At f0.95, the center is a little bit soft, and also the contrast is a little bit low, and also there's a little bit of the glow effect that is visible around some high contrast edges. At f1.4, the center sharpness become a lot better, the glow is largely disappeared, and also the contrast is a lot better. And when I stop down to f2, then the center sharpness become pretty decent. Okay, now let's have a look at the corner. At f0.95, the corner is definitely quite soft and also pretty low contrast. Stop down to f1.4, it is still quite soft, but the contrast improved quite a bit. Stop down to f2, the corner sharpness improved a bit, and when stop down to f2.8, now the corners become quite usable as well. While the corner sharpness may not look very impressive, this is actually pretty normal for a ultra-fast f0.95 full-frame lens. One of the biggest reasons why people want to buy a f0.95 lens is to have that ultra-shallow depth of field look and also that bokeh. So let's have a look at how this Zhongyi lens render the out of focus area. When you are taking photo with your subject is at close distance between 1 to 3 meters, at f0.95, the bokeh looks very nice, and I would say the way how it render the out of focus area is quite different to what a typical f1.4 lens would render, and even compare with this lens at the f1.4 aperture, the photo I got at the maximum aperture f0.95 also looks very different. The bokeh has a slight oval shape, but it also is very soft and has a nice transition at the edge of the bokeh, and it just melts the background in a very creamy and magical way. Another thing I also noticed is when my subject is at a slightly further away distance, for example a little bit more than 5 meters away, then at the corner of the frame, the bokeh would render in a slightly unusual triangle shape. At f0.95 to f1.4, vignetting is quite noticeable. At f2, vignetting become a lot better, and when I stop down to f2.8, then vignetting is barely noticeable. Color fringing can be noticeable when shooting at the maximum aperture, but consider this is a f0.95 lens, so I think the amount of color fringing is quite acceptable. Check out these photos, they were all shot at f0.95, and you can probably see there are actually not too much color fringing at all in these sample photos. There is a small amount of distortion, and it is noticeable in this brick wall sample photo. But when shooting real-world photos, I don't think this small amount of distortion really matter. If I have to pick one thing that is the biggest weakness of this lens, it would have to be the lens flare. When shooting at wide open and there is a strong light source in front of the lens, either it's inside or outside of the frame, the lens flare would cause the contrast of the photo to drop quite a bit. And also quite often you will see there is a rainbow color ring flare inside the photo as a result of the lens flare. Stop down to f1.4 would improve the contrast and also reduce the amount of the ring flare dramatically, and when you stop down to f2, then lens flare is not really a problem anymore. For me, I actually don't mind having a bit of lens flare because I found that add a bit of artistic look to my photos. But if you don't really like having lens flare, then you have to stop down to f1.4 or f2 when there's a strong light source in front of the lens. Another big reason why people want to buy a f0.95 lens is to improve the low light performance. So f0.95 is approximately 1 stop faster than a f1.4 lens. So does this Zhongyi f0.95 lens actually get a 1 more stop of light compared to f1.4? I did a test with this lens and I found that when I'm shooting at f0.95 with this Jongyi lens, I do get almost one stop more light when I compare to shooting at f1.4 with this exact same lens. And if I compare it with the Sigma 50mm f1.4 art lens at f1.4, I get exactly one more stop of light gathering power. So if you're wondering whether this Jongyi lens is actually a f0.95 lens or not, my answer is yes, it is, at least from a light transmission point of view. As mentioned at the beginning of this video, I have also used this Jongyi lens on a Nikon Z body using the Megadeth Leica M2 Nikon Z autofocus adapter. I just want to see how does it performs if I using this autofocus adapter on a Nikon Z body, whether it can autofocus well or not. And I have used this combo to shoot a variation of photos, including just my personal photos. And I have even used this combo as my secondary camera when I shot an event. So does it work? Well, I shot many photos using this combo, and pretty much all the photos I shot at the maximum aperture f0.95, because why else would I use this combo if I don't want to shoot at the maximum aperture f0.95? So I would say not every photo that I got is perfectly focused, and sometimes the focus would hunt, and sometimes it just confused and doesn't know where the focus is. But overall, it works good enough for me, even when I was covering event, when I was taking photo, that I have a few seconds to make sure I get everything right. I probably wouldn't be using this combo to shoot things like a wedding ceremony where every second counts, but as long as I have more than a couple of seconds to get the focus right, and also my subject is not moving quickly, the overall result is quite usable. And I found a way to greatly improve the autofocus speed and also the success rate is to pre-focus the lens first yourself to get it to roughly what it should be, and then get the camera to help you to get the last 10% of the focus to exactly what it should be. This way I get much higher keep rate. The autofocus speed is a lot faster with a lot less hunting, and now I have a f0.95 autofocus lens that is actually quite usable. When taking photo at the maximum aperture f0.95 with this Jongyi lens, the picture I got, I would say the picture quality is probably not as perfect as like compared to some other f1.4 lens when shooting at the maximum aperture. But then I would say the picture quality is good enough that if I got this lens, I would be happy to just shoot at the maximum aperture all the time. And I actually quite like that a little bit, like that softness look that I have when taking photo at the maximum aperture, because combining that with the very shallow depth of field and also that dreamy bokeh, it just gives me some very unique and very artistic look to the photo that I really like, especially if I'm taking portrait photo, and that's something that normal f1.4 lens couldn't give me. Build quality is very decent, and also the lens feels very solid, and the lens has rangefinder coupling and also 6-speed coding. So when you mount it on a Leica M camera, it feels and works pretty much exactly the same like you mount a Leica M lens on the camera. But of course, at $799, the price of this lens is a lot cheaper than a Leica 50mm Noctilus. And if you shoot with a Nikon Z camera and you have been thinking about that Nikon 58mm Noct lens that you haven't bought yet because it's too expensive or it doesn't have autofocus, then this lens could be quite a good alternative for you as well. I say alternative and not a replacement because the Nikon Note is optically quite a bit better than this lens, but for only 10% of the price, you get pretty much the same super shallow depth of field look and also the similar low light performance. You get very dreamy bokeh, and if you pair it with the Megadeck adapter or the equivalent Tech-Art adapter, you now have a 50mm f/0.95 lens that can autofocus, which the Nikon lens can't do.